time management is obsolete. And well, it's not that it isn't valuable. It is valuable. It's just that it's incomplete. It's the one skill that over-reliance on time management will result in the worst kinds of leaders in the future of business. It's not that in places like manufacturing and places where they're highly controlled environments, where the work is predictable and repeatable, it's not that time management isn't valuable in those settings. It is. But the way that the working world is changing is it necessitates a whole different way of managing ourselves beyond what time management has given us. And so Jim Rohn, a famous motivational speaker and author, mentor to the very well-known Tony Robbins, said that you can get more money, but you cannot get more time, or something like that, which is true. Time is more valuable than money in that way. But there's a truth that marketers of today have found about business, that there's something more scarce and more valuable than time, and that's attention. So I like to say that 1 hour of attention is not 1 hour of time. So just because you have someone in their seat for an hour, it does not mean you have an hour of that person's attention. And so when you think about companies like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and even traditional media companies, or companies like Netflix and even Disney Plus, why is it that those companies are valuable? It's not because of how much we pay them. I don't remember the last time I've paid Instagram or paid Facebook for something specifically as a user. They are valuable in the order of billions of dollars because they have your attention, not your money and not your time. They might measure your attention in terms of how much time you spend on their platforms, but they're worth billions because they command attention. And so when you factor that into what the business world will be like in the future, is that one reason why time management is incomplete and not prepared for the future where attention is the most scarce resource that we'll be managing to, is because time management gives us in one way, gives us a false sense of control over our attention. And so specifically, time management in the form where we time block or we account for every minute and hour of our time dedicated to something, it creates a false sense of control over our results, over our activity. And so it results in two different dysfunctions. And in one way it's dysfunctional is that it leads us to think that if we stack the deck, if we maximize our day and we fill every minute and hour of our day with productive activity, that we will be more productive in the end. And this is false. So research has already found, and science has already found, that we don't function well as human beings when our attention is so constrained, that our attention spans are actually decreasing, that this is shown and proven in children and in adults today, that our attention spans are actually decreasing. And what happens when we stack our time and when we stack our days and our schedules so full in that way, we're actually becoming less effective over time. The law of diminishing results or diminishing marginal utility. So every additional unit of time that we spend or we try and stack our day with, we're actually becoming less effective. And so what happens over time? So think of the manager or the individual contributor who's spent hours creating the perfect schedule and have stacked their days, and think of that over weeks and over months, that they're spending more time, they're doing more things, but at the end of the day they're becoming less effective and they're seeing worse and worse results, and they're not seeing a level of results that's proportional to the amount of effort and time they've put in. So that just ultimately leads to frustration and hopelessness. To me, it's like driving a car with the handbrake up. When you know that you're making things deliberately harder, but you're putting more gas into it, you know that you're going to run out of gas sooner, it's going to be harder to drive, and ultimately you're going to run out of steam, you're going to run out of gas. So that's one way time management is ultimately incomplete. The other way is that time management, in the way that we know it today, can make for a great offense, in that we allocate our time and we dedicate our minutes and hours to specific things that we think are important. But even though it makes for a great offense in that way, it actually has a very poor defense. So in terms of a defensive strategy, when people stack their time, stack their schedules so fully, it makes for a very rigid structure. And so ultimately, when interruptions or when changes come into play, people can find themselves ultimately unprepared to meet those changes because they've stacked their schedules so strictly. And so what happens when change is needed, or when an interruption comes up, or a new opportunity comes up? Someone who has stacked their schedule so strictly can be unprepared to meet those opportunities, to be able to adapt to them at their best. I found that leaders who are very vested in their time management systems and their processes, it can be very disturbing for your routine or for your schedule to be disturbed to the point to where it interrupts their ability to perform. And so that's one way that time management makes, in that way, can make for a very weak defense. The other way is really in recognizing that the world of business and the world of leadership is changing in a very important way in the future, that time management as we know it today has a weak defense for, is that we're moving into a more hostile environment. And so I don't mean hostile in terms of people coming out to get you, but hostile in terms of we're moving into environments where everybody is aggressively moving to get your attention. And so how does time management play in a world like that, where we have devices, sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 devices that are vying for your attention? How do we function? How do we lead a team? How do we influence our teams to focus on the right things when there are so many actors in the environment that are vying for attention and vying to influence your behavior? And so traditional time management in terms of structuring a strict schedule is ill prepared for that when the environment that we're in is constructed for distraction. And so what is better? The better world in the future of leadership and management will be developing the skill of attention management. So Gary Vaynerchuk, famous for his marketing chops, I think, and for many other things, speaks a lot about attention and the value of attention. But one thing that he will grow to be more appreciated for in the future are his management chops. And so when you go back there, he has segments in his videos where he talks about leadership and management, and I don't think a lot of that gets a lot of attention, but it will when people start to realize how important that is, that managers will need to be the masters of how to command attention and how to use attention of their teams. And so a manager that can use attention well, that can manage attention well, will be able to achieve goals, will be able to achieve outcomes with the minimum amount of attention used. Think about that in terms of managers who are stacking agendas and filling an hour's meeting worth of things to talk about versus those managers who are using their team's attention effectively. How do I use my team's attention during the minimum amount of time during this meeting to answer the right questions to get the right results and have the right activities? So it's a whole different way of operating versus those who are trying to fill time and trying to fill a 1-hour meeting. And so effective management and effective leadership will have to come from that perspective of effective attention management. And so the field of attention management is fairly new. The time management structures and time management processes, books have been around since the 50s, basically since we've industrialized as a world. But attention management is something that's newer because we're in a world now where we have more things that are competing for your attention and aggressively going for your attention. So the two things that I know that are components of attention management that you can use to develop are how to develop attention management of yourself, the things that are going inside you, and attention management in terms of your environment. So when it comes to the self, there are two things to keep in mind about developing attention management of the self. The first thing is your ability to focus. And it's not focus in the way of just locking in and doing something, but it's specifically around meditation. It's developing the practice of meditation. And so some people will associate meditation with peacefulness and calm and reaching a Zen state maybe, and just generally feeling good. But in terms of a management skill, meditation is important for practicing a very specific thing. It's important for practicing coming back to a point of focus. And so meditation isn't about eliminating any noise in your mind. It isn't about eliminating thoughts. It's not about having complete silence. It's about practicing that skill of seeing a stimulus, having a thought, having a feeling, and then coming back to a place of focus. So that's why, in terms of self-attention management, the skill and the practice of meditation is going to be important there. The second piece of that with self-attention management is actually how you connect the dots between your dreams, your visions, your big ideas, and the things that you're actually doing, your activities, your work. And so traditional project management might create a long plan for how do you go from vision to a strategy to a plan and create your long task list. So that might be one way to go about it. But when it comes to attention management, your goal here is how do you go from a clear vision to clear priorities and commitments, and how does that translate to what you're doing today? So the pitfall to avoid when it comes to that part of self-management is not to get caught up in planning, not to get caught up in that activity of feeling like because I'm creating a very great and beautiful plan that I feel productive because I've done this. That what I've found is that there are leaders and managers who use planning as a way to avoid doing the work. And so how do you do enough planning? How do you do enough strategic thinking to drive day-to-day activity? And that's the goal that you should have for self-attention management. The second part of it, of attention management, is around your environment. And so there's one surface level piece of this about managing your environment where it's eliminating distraction. So it's not sitting at a desk where you have your mail, where you have your iPad or your phone or your game systems or your gaming laptop in front of you. It's creating an environment that minimizes your distractions. So that's one level of it, of optimizing your environment for attention management, is eliminating distraction. The other part of that, though, is how do you be in an environment that isn't just eliminating distraction, but creates an environment of inspiration? And so part of this isn't being in the same environment all the time. So if you're engaged in work where you need to focus on a very predictable task, this is okay to be in the same environment, predictable environment that's very controlled. But what if you're doing work that needs a little bit more inspiration? And it's not necessarily in arts. Even creating presentations, even approaching how to address a certain unique problem requires you to be creative. How do you be in an environment that is conducive for creativity? And for some of that, it is being in an environment that has outside stimulus. And for me, when I grew up with 4 brothers. And so there was never a time where it was quiet for studying or quiet for writing papers. There was always noise. And when I went to college, I found that I was not able to function well in libraries. I could not study for the life of me in libraries. I would immediately fall asleep. And so I found that the best place for me to study was usually the coffee shop, or usually the commons, or the place where everyone was making noise and eating. And that allowed me to tap into a different kind of focus that I developed in childhood, where I could listen to background noise and actually tune it all out and let inspiration and let outside stimulus bring new things to what I was thinking about, and consider approaching a problem or approaching an idea in a different way. And so that's one way where you can also optimize your environment for creativity, is how do you create an environment that might introduce stimulus that's useful for creativity, or useful for you to bounce off ideas, useful for you to not just be boxed into what's right in front of you. The other part of self-attention management is not just your physical environment and the things around you, but your psychological environment. So one system that's at work in all of our lives when it comes to attention management, and we all get this, is your environment of the people that you're around. So Jim Rohn famously said that you're the average of the 5 people you spend most time with. And that's mostly true. The people you spend time with will influence your behavior, will influence the things that you believe. So optimizing your psychological environment then is making certain choices about who you're around, and not just in terms of the time you spend, but who you spend attention with. So this is an important distinction, that if you're in a workplace where you might see your coworkers, or you're on a team where you might see your teammates, and spend the most time with them, and even your boss or the people that you report to, you might spend a lot of time with them. If you need outside stimulus to grow in a different way than that environment is giving you, how do you bring in teachers? How do you bring in influences? Reading books, listening to videos, following me? How do you bring influences in your life where you can spend attention very purposefully to outweigh who you spend time with? So that's one way you can optimize your psychological environment, is understanding who's around you by default, and with intention, bring people into your environment who you spend quality attention with, like teachers and mentors and people from outside of your workplace. So if you're into time management, and there's wonderful tools out there, I've seen some awesome things that people have done with Trello, with Notion, with creating time management systems. That's all great. And I think it's still valuable to invest in those as skills. But in terms of being a complete leader, it's equally important to develop the skills of attention management. So I'd love for you to follow me on this journey, because I'm going to be breaking apart what attention management looks like as an individual contributor, as a middle manager, as a founder, as an entrepreneur, and what that means to be an expert at attention management for the future of business.